The early morning started as usual. The town was slowly waking up, whining cars and rare passers-by filled the streets. No one suspected that for one family, this day would be the hardest in their lives. The main characters are a family of 4. John, his wife Lisa, their 15-year-old son Michael, and their youngest daughter Emma. Outwardly an ideal family, they had just moved into a new house in the suburbs, where life was supposed to be calm and measured. John got a promotion at work, Lisa took care of the house and children, while Michael was at school, and Emma ran to dance clubs. But there was one but. The house they moved into was not as harmless as it seemed. The first couple of weeks passed quietly. The family was arranging their new life, furnishing the house with furniture, getting to know the neighbors. But one evening, when they were about to have dinner, something strange happened. John noticed that the attic door in their house, which they had never opened, was slightly ajar. At first, he attributed it to a draft because the old building could have hidden defects, but anxiety began to arise inside him anyway. The next day, John decided to lock this door so that no one would accidentally climb into the attic. However, a week later, the door was ajar again, although the lock was intact. Lisa began to suspect that something was wrong and suggested calling a foreman to check the locks and doors. But John was convinced that he would solve the problem himself. Meanwhile, Michael started complaining that he hears strange noises at night, as if something is moving around the attic. He often got up at night, couldn't sleep, and anxiously wandered around the house checking rooms. Parents did not attach any importance to this, believing that it was just teenage fears and adaptation to a new place. However, Emma soon began to behave strangely. The little girl, usually so cheerful, suddenly withdrew into herself, refused to go to mugs, and spent more and more time in her room. She began to draw strange, disturbing drawings in which she depicted something that her parents could not understand. Lisa found one of her drawings, where a large black silhouette was painted, standing next to her bed. When the mother asked her daughter what it was, Emma replied that it was the man from the attic. John, upon hearing this, decided to conduct a thorough check of the house. He went up to the attic, hoping to find something that could explain the children's strange behavior. However, apart from old boxes, dilapidated wooden beams and dust, he found nothing. But still, the feeling that something was wrong did not leave him. After a few days, the situation worsened. Lisa began to notice that inexplicable things were happening to their belongings. Objects were missing, and then found themselves in the most unexpected places. John at that moment believed that it was all a game of their imagination. They were too tired with the move and simply did not notice where they put their things. But soon events took an even more eerie turn. One night, while the whole family was sleeping, Michael was suddenly awakened by a loud bang. He jumped out of bed and hurried into the living room. His heart was pounding in his chest when he saw that the huge old vase standing on the shelf had been smashed to pieces. There were fragments on the floor, and it seemed that this could not happen just like that. It was as if someone or something had deliberately dropped the vase. From that moment on, the house was filled with anxiety. Even John, a skeptic, began to notice oddities. Things were moving, doors were closing and opening on their own, and the night sounds were getting louder. The night when everything changed was especially quiet. The wind did not stir the leaves. There were no animal cries, no distant humming of cars. There was a sense of impending threat in the air, as if space itself was expecting something terrible. Michael, as before, could not sleep. He hadn't slept properly for several nights now, nervous about the strange noises coming from the attic. He felt a shiver run through his body every time he heard muffled footsteps, as if someone was heavily treading on the old wooden floors above his head. But things got a lot worse that night. When he tried to close his eyes and fall asleep, a clear feeling that someone was watching him made him get out of bed. This time, Michael decided to find out what was going on. He left his room, carefully closing the door so as not to wake his parents and sister. He tiptoed to the stairs leading to the attic. He didn't turn on the light, as if his instinct told him that it might attract the attention of something that shouldn't have noticed him. John, awakened by the slight creaking of the doors, came out of the bedroom, seeing his son making his way to the attic. He called softly to Michael, but he did not turn around, continuing to climb the stairs. The father, not understanding what motivates his son, hurried after him, but stopped when he saw Michael open the attic door. There was a silence inside the attic that seemed almost deafening. Dusty boxes, cobwebbed beams, and dim light coming through a small window created a gloomy atmosphere. John felt cold sweat break out on his forehead and whispered, "Michael, what are you doing?" Michael turned and looked at his father, his eyes full of fear. "Dad, I have to find out what's going on there. I can't take it anymore," he said, his voice trembling. John sighed and, calming himself down, decided to check the attic with his son. But as soon as they took a step inside, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. Father and son rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge, as if it was locked from the outside. In a panic, John started banging on the door, shouting for Lisa to let him out, but no one responded. It became noticeably cold in the attic, and the breathing of both could be heard louder and louder. At some point, they froze when they heard a rustle in the corner of the room. They both froze, looking in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing. And then, John felt someone's touch on him. A sharp chill ran down his spine, and when he looked at his hand, there were slight scratches on it, as if someone had walked over it with claws. He hurried over to Michael, who was standing rooted to the spot, looking at the place where the sound was coming from. "There's someone there?" Michael whispered, and at that moment, they both heard creaking footsteps approaching them. John grabbed his son's hand and tried to open the window, but it wouldn't budge, and neither would the door. At that moment, they heard a loud bang on the floor, as if someone or something had dropped a heavy object. It was enough to make their nerves finally give out. John and Michael rushed to the door and began to break it down with furious force. It seemed as if something was reaching out to them in the dark, and each of their blows on the door was accompanied by a dull rustle behind them. Suddenly, the door swung open by itself, and they, as if released, flew out into the corridor. In his haste, John looked back and saw something huge and dark quickly disappear into the depths of the attic. They both fell to the floor in the hallway, panting, and Lisa and Emma, hearing their screams, had already run out to them. John got up first, trembling with terror and fear for his family. They couldn't stay in this house anymore. "We're leaving," he said decisively, not even trying to explain to his wife what had happened. Lisa, seeing the expression on his face and the condition of her son, did not ask questions. The next morning, they loaded the essentials into the car and left the house without even looking back. Weeks have passed. The family rented an apartment in another area and tried to return to normal life. But Michael's night terrors wouldn't let go. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that dark silhouette standing behind them in the attic. He began to suffer from nightmares and panic attacks. Lisa noticed that her son was becoming increasingly withdrawn and irritable, until one night he disappeared. At first, John and Lisa thought Michael had gone outside to get some fresh air, but when he didn't return a couple of hours later, they started looking for him all over the neighborhood. Towards dawn, they came across their son's footprints, leading to the old house they had left a few weeks ago. When John and Lisa went inside, the horror they experienced was indescribable. Michael was lying in the middle of the living room. He was covered in scratches and dirt, and his gaze was blank, as if he had seen something that had robbed him of his mind. He didn't say a word, just clenched his hands into fists and stared at the attic door, which, oddly enough, was ajar again. They tried to call doctors, but Michael's condition only worsened. Every time he came to his senses, he kept saying only one thing: "It won't let us go." A few days later, his condition deteriorated sharply, and in the hospital, doctors diagnosed him with an acute mental disorder caused by unknown stress. John and Lisa tried to forget about everything that had happened, but the house, like a curse, would not let them go. A few weeks later, they learned that the new owner of the house had found the diary of the previous tenant, which described similar horrors. The family who lived there before them also encountered something inexplicable, but did not fully understand what it was. John and Lisa had nightmares. The house continued to live its life, and every night in their new apartment they heard the same sounds that once haunted them in the attic. It's been a few days since Michael was hospitalized. Lisa and John couldn't believe that all this was happening to their son. Every attempt to connect his condition to something real seemed inconclusive, but they both knew that the answers were somewhere nearby. John, feeling helpless, decided to return to the house. He wanted to find a rational explanation for everything that had happened. He went there alone, without telling Lisa, so as not to alarm her even more. As John drove up to the old house, he felt an icy touch of fear, but it only strengthened his resolve. He couldn't just sit back knowing that his son was fighting for his health. When John opened the creaking door, the house greeted him with dead silence. No footsteps, no voices, nothing, just a ringing emptiness. He walked deeper into the house, feeling his heart beating faster and faster. He didn't want to go to the attic, but he knew that there was the key to everything. The stairs seemed longer than before, but John went up to the attic anyway. The light entered the room through a narrow window, and now the room seemed less intimidating. John knelt down and began to carefully inspect the floor, boxes, and beams, hoping to find at least something that would explain the strange events. After a few minutes, he noticed scratches on the wall. They looked strange, deep, uneven. It was as if someone was trying to forcefully scratch something out of the wall. Looking closer, John found that the wall in this place looked new, as if it had been recently plastered. He felt a wave of curiosity. Pulling a knife out of his pocket, John began to carefully peel off a layer of paint and plaster. After several minutes of painstaking work, he came across something solid. A small metal box was hidden under a layer of plaster. John pulled it out of the wall with an effort. The drawer was old, with a rusty lock. There was nothing to do but smash it. Inside, among the moldy papers, was a magazine, a thick notebook, the pages of which were yellowed with age. John sat down on the floor and began to read. The magazine belonged to the previous owner of the house. His notes talked about strange sounds and visions that haunted the residents, but then everything became even more gloomy. One of the entries mentioned the suspicion that the previous family had been subjected to a mental attack. The residents felt each other's strange behavior and began to quarrel over small things, reaching physical abuse. The man described how his wife was gradually losing her mind, and their little daughter complained of constant headaches and voices in her head. John froze. These symptoms resembled Michael's condition. He began to look for a connection. Further notes from the owner mentioned that the source of the whole nightmare could be a side effect of some invisible influence. The house may have been built on the site where an abandoned industrial facility once stood. Rumor has it that barrels of dangerous chemicals were buried at this place. But the records were getting less and less clear. It became clear that the person who wrote this magazine was also paranoid. John felt that this could be the end of the chain leading to their problems. Everything pointed to contamination of the soil or air, which could cause mental disorders in people. Probably their family, like the previous ones, became a victim of poisoning. With a feeling of relief and fear at the same time, John decided to return to the hospital and tell the doctors about his findings. Perhaps, if his guesses are confirmed, it will be possible to save Michael. He folded the magazine carefully and hurried to the car. Back at the hospital, John began to explain his assumptions to the doctor, describing everything he had learned. The doctor listened with interest, but was skeptical about this version. They ordered additional tests for Michael to check for the possibility of poisoning with toxic substances. A few days later, the test results confirmed John's suspicions. Michael had indeed been poisoned. The source is the polluted soil and air around the old house. Doctors began intensive treatment to remove toxins from Michael's body, but his mental state remained extremely unstable. While the doctors were treating Michael, John and Lisa learned that their family was not the only one suffering from the effects of toxins. The entire area around the house was unsafe. Authorities have launched an investigation and identified illegal burials of dangerous chemicals that have led to poisoning of local residents for decades. Michael was slowly recovering, but the consequences were devastating for his psyche. The time spent in the house and its toxic effects have left an indelible mark on his health. The family moved away from this place, leaving the past behind them forever. John still blames himself for not noticing the danger earlier, but he knows one thing: their family survived this real nightmare story that they will never forget. John and Lisa sat by Michael's bedside in the hospital room for a long time. The bright room filled with the quiet hum of the machines was soothing, but the silence weighed on them. It's been a few weeks since John found out the truth about the house, but their lives will never be the same. Michael's treatment was slow. Although the doctors were able to remove the toxins, his mental state left much to be desired. He often fell into deep depressions, sometimes stopped recognizing his parents, and constantly complained of headaches. His speech slowed down, and it was difficult for him to concentrate on anything. John and Lisa did their best to support their son, but they felt that the time spent in that house had left an indelible mark on them all. Every day, they realized that their family life was now full of constant tension and fear for Michael's future. After a few months, realizing that their son's recovery would be long and difficult, they decided to start from scratch. The family moved to another city, leaving behind a house that became for them a symbol of a ruined life. Lisa found a job closer to her new home, and John began working remotely to spend more time with Michael. But even away from the past, the pain would not let them go. Every night was filled with anxiety. Every time Michael woke up from another nightmare or withdrew into himself, John and Lisa could not get rid of the guilt that they did not see the danger in time. Over time, Michael began to recover a little. His speech improved, although he still suffered from periodic blackouts and irritability. The family continued to search for answers to the unanswered questions, but one thing was clear: the toxic materials that ruined their lives will forever remain a part of their memories. The story of Michael, John, and Lisa has become a local legend. People talked about this incident as a tragedy that could have been prevented. No one could have imagined that the house they lived in would be the cause of so much trouble. But that was the reality. No mysticism, no shadows, just the harsh truth about how one house can destroy a family.